Hi everyone, it's Tony once again. Today I'm gonna talk about the disastrous voyage of the 2nd and 3rd Pacific Squadrons from Europe to the Pacific. This voyage was so full of weird and unexpected events that justify an episode just about it. In the event of a war with Japan, the Russian strategy was to send warships from the Baltic Sea to reinforce the Pacific Squadron. But since the war was going so badly, many ministers tried to dissuade the Tsar from going on with his madness, but to no avail. Incentivized by the Kaiser of Germany, the Tsar created the 2nd Pacific Squadron, comprised of the newest ships of the Baltic Fleet, including 4 of the brand new Borodino-class battleships, the only surviving Peresvet-class ship, Oslabya, and many other ships. It was a very heterogeneous fleet, combining brand new and untested ships with very old and almost obsolete vessels. It was led by Admiral Rozhesvansky, a fearsome disciplinary, known in the fleet as Mad Dog. As you'll see, he easily lost his patience. The biggest problem was the quality of the crews. Since his ships were so new, the sailors lacked training, and the fleet even suffered sabotage by revolutionaries. On 15 of October 1904, the huge fleet of around 40 ships departed. Ahead of them lay a 29,000 kilometers voyage, while the Japanese were preparing a nasty welcome party to greet them. As identification marks, Russian ships were painted black with yellow funnels. The events of this video are based on the letters written by engineer-constructor Eugene Politovsky to his wife during the voyage. First, the fleet sailed through the Baltic Sea into the North Sea, and during the voyage, a series of rumors started to circle saying that the Japanese had deployed to the region torpedo boats to sink the Russian ships en route. Of course, the Japanese didn't do that, but the Russians were now hysterical of an imminent attack. Near Denmark, the Russians opened fire against an approaching suspect boat, which was carrying diplomatic letters from the Tsar. Now, it's time to talk of quite possibly the most infamous ship of the war. During the 20th century, there were some famous warships that became legends: the USS Enterprise, the Hood, the Bismarck, and then there's the repair ship Kamchatka. Still in Danish waters, this ship sent a message saying that, amazingly, it was being attacked by 8 Japanese torpedo boats from all directions. It was a false alarm, but this further increased fear amongst the fleet. While crossing the Dogger Bank during the night, the fleet spotted the whole trawler fishing fleet. And due to previous events, some Russians identified the peaceful trawlers as dangerous enemy torpedo boats and opened fire. The chaotic night involved Russian ships shooting against each other by mistake and against the poor trawlers. The next day, the Russians saw the result of a complete night of madness. The inaccuracy of the Russian guns was so bad that luckily only one trawler, the Crane, was sunk, with 6 more damaged. A huge international scandal. No! A monument was made in memory of the murdered British fisherman at Hull, named the North Sea Outrage Memorial. The British were furious with this action, and the mighty Royal Navy sorted and shadowed the Russians for some time, while a diplomatic solution was found, which resulted on the Russians paying compensation to the fishermen. Now, instead of using the Suez Canal, most of the modern ships went around Africa and then met in the Indian Ocean. Since Rozhesvansky wasn't confident on the skill of his ship crews, he did this to prevent a chaotic traffic jam in the canal, which would have been quite expensive to Russia. The fleet continued its voyage, and near Tangier, the Kamchatka just disappeared for a few days. It eventually rejoined the fleet, reporting that it spent 300 shells fighting 3 Japanese warships.
No, God! No, God, please, no!
As you might have guessed, these ships were in fact Swedish, German and French neutral vessels, peacefully crossing the seas until a crazy Russian repair ship crossed their path and started shooting against them.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
And the cherry on the top of the cake came shortly after. As the fleet left Tangier, one ship managed to cut the city's underwater telegraph cable with her anchor, preventing communication between Africa and Europe for 4 days.
Hello? Hello? He hung up.
The Kamchatka now sailed close to the admiral's ship to prevent any further wrongdoing and was constantly inquired about how things were on board. Near the equator, they performed the traditional celebrations of its crossing, with hazings to increase the morale. Stage plays were also performed to reduce boredom. The fleets continued its journey around Africa, and near Portuguese Angola, the Kamchatka, again, instead of sending a message that everything was fine, sent the message, "Do you see torpedo boats?" starting another panic. It's quite possible that much of the history of this ship was exaggerated and romanticized since it was the perfect scapegoat. Since most nations were neutral, they forbid the Russians from stopping at their harbors for more than 24 hours. Not enough time to refuel so many ships all at once. So the Kaiser provided 60 coaling ships from the Hamburg-America line to resupply the fleet during the voyage. Because of this, they were forced to stop 40 times during the entire trip to resupply. This was a hard and laborious job that required to cover all hatches and holes on the ship to prevent the entrance of coal dust, causing huge fatigue to the poor Russian sailors and making their voyage a living hell. To reduce the number of refueling operations, they filled every room and deck available with coal. But this was extremely dangerous since coal dust covered everything on board, and it was something like pouring gasoline on board. And it was also a health problem since coal filled the lungs of the Russian sailors. In December, the 2nd Squadron entered Portuguese territorial waters in Angola, near the Bay of Tigres. And I decided to translate this event reported by the Portuguese 1st Lieutenant Silva Nogueira, on board the tiny gunboat Limpopo, armed with two 47mm guns. On the 6th of December, I saw smoke on the north, and shortly after, the huge Russian fleet appeared and laid anchor less than 3 miles from the peninsula. I immediately departed and counted 21 ships, 11 warships, 1 hospital ship and 9 cargo ships. They were all black with yellow funnels, with a small stripe of black above. I passed around the admiral's ship while hearing the national anthem playing, so I went on board and was received with full military honors by the admiral, who invited me to sit on a chair. We are currently discussing with your ambassador in St. Petersburg so that our fleet can enter the city of Lawrence Marks. We are currently on international waters. I'm sorry, but as you can see on the map, since this bay has less than 10 miles, the national waters count from the end of the bay, so this is Portuguese territory and you must leave immediately.
Let's give these bastards a good hammering!
The admiral fell silent. Then he asked me, a little upset, Can we stay on our current position for 24 hours? Yes, under international law you may. But if you pass that time, I'll be forced to take action. Thank you. But isn't odd that you make the demands when you have just a tiny gunboat? Since you are on Portuguese waters, I have to report all foreign ships' movements on our territory. Oh, so you like to see ships? Don't worry, I'll show you all of them. No need, I've got all the info that I need. Following this, I gave my compliments and returned to the ship. The next day, exactly 24 hours later, the entire Russian fleet departed. It's quite impressive to read this event since the Portuguese officer didn't hesitate to fire against the mighty Russian fleet. Years later, this Portuguese officer visited Japan and received the Japanese Order of the Sacred Treasure for his bravery. Near South Africa, Rozhesvansky received info that the 3rd Pacific Squadron, under the command of Admiral Nebogotov, was being sent from the Baltic to reinforce his fleet. The admiral opposed this since all of those ships were obsolete vessels, ironically referred by him as the self-sinkers. This fleet was allowed to cross the Suez Canal, but Rozhesvansky did his best to avoid contact to them, since they would hinder his fleet. Events took a more severe downturn when the cooling plant on the fleet's refrigerated supply ship broke down. Lots of rotting meat was dropped to the sea, which resulted in the fleet being followed by sharks. Not a good omen. In Madagascar, the fleet stopped for a long time to wait for the arrival of the 3rd Squadron, and there they received the awful news that Port Arthur had fallen. The waiting time in Madagascar was terrible for the Russians. The ships were designed for operations on the cold Baltic Sea, and now the extreme heat of Madagascar made living conditions there completely infernal. Many of the sailors went insane and tried to flee to the shore, since they hadn't been on land for months. Meanwhile, many of the sailors brought on board animals that they found ashore to use as pets. Chameleons, dogs, poisonous snakes, monkeys, parrots, and more. Cows were also purchased to provide fresh milk for the officers, and oxen for meat. They were kept on the main deck of the ships. Now, where's the Kamchatka? Oh, here it is, firing a live shell by mistake against the cruiser Aurora to salute the death of a sailor. Then, a few days later, the Kamchatka said that it was sinking. But it was nothing more than a cracked steam pipe in the engine room.
What? What the fuck?
Kamchatka, when your spoiled rotten toddler is 7,000 tons and wants nothing to do with the family field trip. Meanwhile, news of events at home arrived, like the shooting of hundreds of unarmed, peaceful demonstrators in St. Petersburg, known as the Bloody Sunday, on 22 January 1905. During this voyage, the ships were exposed to a series of problems. There were constant mechanical breakdowns on the engines, the ship's hulls were covered with biofueling, which further reduced the ship's top speed, and gunpowder of the shells lost quality since they traveled through cold, humid, dry and hot environments. Meanwhile, Togo used all his available time to train his men, performing naval maneuvers and improving their accuracy. In just 10 days, the battleship crews spent their entire 1-year stock of shells meant for training. They also learned how to distinguish their targets based on their silhouettes, to prevent friendly fire. Since the Japanese were so close to home, they didn't have the problem of biofouling like the Russians had, and their engines were fully operational. Also, the morale of the average Japanese sailor was extremely high. Compared to the Russians, they didn't have to endure the hard voyage around Africa, and they knew that they were the last line of defense between Russia and their country, family, and the most important of all, their emperor. Around Japan, Korea and the island of Formosa, a complete network of observers was installed, with radio sets to detect and report the location of the Russian 2nd Pacific Squadron. On 11 of May 1905, the 3rd Pacific Squadron joined the main fleet off the coast of Indochina. Shortly after, there was a gas leak on the hospital ship Orel, suffocating many of the poor, injured and sick men on board. Since Port Arthur was no longer on Russian hands, Admiral Rozhesvansky was instructed to proceed to Vladivostok, meet with the remaining ships there and then figure out what to do from there. However, Vladivostok was virtually a desert, with almost no factories and repair plants. The docks and port facilities were too narrow for the Borodinos, and it was almost impossible to rearm the battleships, since there were no shells stored there. To reach it, the Admiral had 3 routes, but since the ships were in such poor shape after 7 months at sea, and the crews were exhausted and at point of mutiny, and the other routes required to go around Japan, he decided to cross the Straits of Tsushima, the quickest route. Togo was certain that the Russians would cross the Straits of Tsushima, so for months he prepared his men for the final battle. He swore to the Emperor that he would decisively sink or capture all Russian ships and save the country. This was a bold statement. If he failed, seppuku was his only salvation. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe my YouTube channel and ring the bell to be notified of my new videos. For more info about my LEGO models, please visit my Flickr webpage. Thank you and see you next time!